watching Nile TV International live from Cairo. Time for Panorama News. I'm Nusreen Behar, and we start with the headlines. President Sisi wishes Saudi Prince bin Salman a speedy recovery after successful surgery. The US and EU say vaccine programs on track as global deaths hit 2.5 million. And US strikes Iran-backed militia facilities in Syria, killing 17. Welcome back. Time for the news in full. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi greeted Saudi Crown Prince Salman bin Abdulaziz on his recovery after undergoing a successful surgery, wishing him speedy recovery and asking God to grant him good health. In a post on his official Facebook account, President al-Sisi sent his heartfelt greetings to the Saudi Crown Prince, wishing him health and wellness. Earlier on Wednesday, the Saudi royal court said that Prince Mohammed bin Salman had undergone a successful surgery and had left hospital soon after the operation. Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli asserted that Egypt's current focus is to restore the economy to rates prior to the coronavirus pandemic and to implement plans according to outlined priorities. He added that highlighting the mega projects of sustainable infrastructure as well as establishing new cities such as new administrative capital, New Alamein City and others, in addition to setting up new economic and logistic zones, are on top of the priorities. This came during Madbouli's speech entitled Egypt 2021 and What's After at a webinar organized by the American Chamber of Commerce, AmCham, in Egypt. The Premier noted that despite the relative setback in many economic indicators following the outbreak of COVID-19, the recent economic reforms introduced by Egypt has greatly contributed to achieving flexibility and enabled the country to mitigate the negative impact of such a great challenge. Madbouli stated that Egypt's economy is among the fewest in the region which achieved positive growth rates amid the pandemic, adding that Egyptian growth rates reached 6% before the virus outbreak. Egypt has reported on Thursday 589 new coronavirus infections, bringing the total number of cases to 180,640 people since the outbreak hit the country in mid-February. The Health Ministry also reported 46 new deaths, bringing the total number of fatalities to 10,541. The Ministry added that 422 patients were discharged from hospitals, rising the number of those who have recovered to 139,494 people. The United States hailed progress in turning around its troubled COVID-19 vaccine rollout, and the European Union said it was also on track to meet jab targets as global coronavirus deaths topped 2.5 million. In total, more than 2.5 million deaths and over 112.5 million cases have been reported, with almost half of the fatalities occurring in just 5 countries: the United States, Brazil, Mexico, India and Britain. More details with the following report. The EU said it was on track to hit its target of vaccinating 70% of adults by the end of the summer, although progress remains sluggish, while the global coronavirus death toll topped 2.5 million. The milestone came as a new study showed Pfizer's COVID jab to be 94% effective, raising hopes for mass immunization campaigns to help end the pandemic. The World Health Organization, WHO, meanwhile, urged governments to try to better understand the long-term consequences of coronavirus on some sufferers, calling the impact of prolonged symptoms a significant burden. After a video summit of EU leaders focused on the bloc's vaccinating rollout against COVID-19, European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen said fully vaccinating just under 3/4 of adults by late summer was a goal that we're confident with. But EU leaders warned that tight travel restrictions must remain as the bloc stepped up efforts to accelerate the provision of vaccines, although it would take months, not weeks, to build enough vaccine supplies. Some leaders want Europe to develop a so-called green passport for those who have been vaccinated to travel and socialize. The bloc has been plagued by vaccine supply problems and has come under fire for its stuttering rollout. The COVID-19 vaccines are boosting hopes that countries can finally start to emerge from the pandemic that has killed more than 2.5 million people and infected at least 112 million worldwide. U.S. President Joe Biden on Thursday celebrated 50 million COVID-19 vaccines administered since he took over, saying the rollout is now weeks ahead of schedule. In total, 2,500,172 deaths and 112,618,488 cases have been reported, with almost half of the fatalities occurring in just 5 countries: the U.S., Brazil, Mexico, India, and Britain. The Arab-led coalition fighting in Yemen said it intercepted and destroyed a second armed drone launched by Houthis towards Saudi Arabia. The coalition said earlier on Friday that it had intercepted and destroyed an explosive-laden drone launched towards the southern Saudi city of Khamis Mushaid. Libya's designated Prime Minister said he had proposed a governing plan to the country's divided parliament as part of a peace process. Designated Prime Minister Abdelhamid Dbeibeh told a news conference in Tripoli that it will be a government of technocrats representing the whole Libyan spectrum, adding that he had attempted a fair distribution of posts between the west, east and south of the country. However, he did not announce any names for cabinet roles after a process of intense negotiations over recent weeks to form a government that could win acceptance across front lines. The Libyan premier has until March 19th to win approval for a cabinet before tackling the joint task of unifying Libya's proliferating institutions and leading the transition up to December 24th polls. The U.S. military has struck Iran-backed militias in eastern Syria, killing at least 22 people, according to a war monitor in what the Pentagon described as a message from the new administration after recent rocket attacks targeting U.S. troops in Iraq. More details in the following report. U.S. President Joe Biden directed his country's military airstrikes in eastern Syria against facilities belonging to what the Pentagon said were Iran-backed militia in a calibrated response to rocket attacks against U.S. targets in Iraq. The strikes appeared to be limited in scope, potentially lowering the risk of escalation. It was not immediately clear what damage was caused. Syrian state-owned TV said the strikes had been at dawn against several targets near the Syrian-Iraqi border and quoted a medical source at a hospital in the area and other unspecified local sources as saying 17 people have been killed. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby said in a statement that the strikes destroyed multiple facilities at a border control point used by a number of Iranian-backed militant groups, including Kataib Hezbollah and Kataib Sayyid al-Shuhada. After the airstrikes, the Iranian and Syrian foreign ministers spoke and underlined the need of the West to adhere to UN Security Council resolutions regarding Syria. Meanwhile, Russia's foreign ministry said on Friday that Moscow strongly condemned U.S. airstrikes in Syria against facilities belonging to what the Pentagon said were Iran-backed militias. U.S. President Joe Biden told Saudi King Salman he would work for bilateral ties as strong and transparent as possible. The statement came ahead of the expected release of a sensitive U.S. intelligence report on the 2018 murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The White House said that U.S. President discussed in a phone call with Saudi King regional security and other issues, and that the new U.S. President told the Saudi monarch that he would work to make the bilateral relationship as strong and transparent as possible. The two leaders affirmed the historic nature of the relationship. Biden later told reporters that the call, which is their first since he took office last month, was good. Iran officially started restricting international inspections of its nuclear facilities. This comes as a bid to pressure European countries and U.S. President Joe Biden's administration to lift crippling economic sanctions and restore the 2015 nuclear deal. More details in the following report. Iran has threatened to end the deal struck with the United Nations nuclear watchdog last weekend, temporarily salvaging much monitoring of its activities if the agency's board endorses a US-led push to criticize Tehran next week. The move prompted Britain, France and Germany, the three European nations party to the 2015 nuclear deal, to say they deeply regret the decision and they were united in underlining the dangerous nature of this decision. Tehran this week scaled back cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, ending extra inspection measures introduced by its 2015 nuclear accord with major powers. It was the latest of many steps retaliating for US sanctions reimposed after the United States pulled out of the agreement in 2018. Iran and US President Joe Biden's administration are now locked in a standoff over who should move first to save the unraveling 2015 deal. Tehran says Washington should lift sanctions first. Biden wants Iran to undo its many retaliatory breaches of the deal's nuclear restrictions first. In its own paper sent to other IAEA member states ahead of next week's quarterly meeting of the United Nations Watchdog's 35-nation Board of Governors, the United States said it wants a resolution to express the board's deepening concern with respect to Iran's cooperation with the IAEA. The Iranian Atomic Energy Organization has said that under the new law, if there is still no lifting of US sanctions after 3 months, it will start erasing the recordings. United Nations human rights investigators will issue their findings on the case of Kremlin critic Andrei Navalny on Monday. The opposition politician was arrested in Moscow in January upon returning from Germany following treatment for poisoning with what many Western countries say was a military-grade nerve agent. According to the United Nations statement revealing the investigation, Agnes Calmard, UN expert on killings, and Irene Khan, UN expert on freedom of opinion and expression, will issue their findings on their investigation at a Geneva press conference on Monday. Moving to Armenia, the Kremlin said on Friday that Armenia should comply with agreements reached with Azerbaijan after last year's Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. The statement came despite the political upheaval in Armenia, with the army demanding Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan quit. Thousands rallied behind Pashinyan after the army's written demand plunged the impoverished former Soviet Republic of less than 3 million into a new political crisis, what he said was an attempted coup. More details in the following report. Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan defied calls to resign and accused the military of an attempted coup, as divisions over his handling of last year's war with Azerbaijan brought thousands to the streets. Hours after the General Staff of Armenia's military made a shock call for the government to step down, Pashinyan rallied about 20,000 supporters in the center of the capital against what he said was an attempt to oust him. The opposition gathered about 10,000 of its own supporters not far away, then began putting up tents and building barricades outside Parliament as it vowed to hold round-the-clock demonstrations. There were no signs of any military action against Pashinyan, who ordered the armed forces to stand behind the government. The Defense Ministry also issued a statement declaring that the attempts to involve the military in political processes are unacceptable. Pashinyan said he was ready to start talks with the opposition, but also threatened to arrest any opponents who go beyond political statements. The Prime Minister has been under intense pressure over his handling of the conflict for control of the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region, but has ignored repeated calls to resign for losing swaths of territory to Azerbaijan. After backing the Prime Minister for months, the Military General Staff on Thursday joined calls for him to step down, saying in a statement that he and his cabinet are not capable of taking adequate decisions. Pashinyan hit back with an accusation that top brass were mounting an attempted military coup and ordered the firing of the Chief of the General Staff, Unik Gasparyan. Myanmar police launched a crackdown overnight in a neighborhood of the main city of Yangon to break up a protest against a military-appointed official. The development came as the World Bank said it will not process requests for funds made after the February 1st military takeover. Myanmar has been in crisis since the army seized power and detained civilian government leader Aung San Suu Kyi and much of her party leadership after the military complained of fraud in a November election. Riot police fired tear gas in a neighborhood in Yangon to disperse a crowd protesting against the replacement of an official in charge of the district by one appointed by the military. Suu Kyi's supporters said on social media that they intend to hold another protest on Friday. The army said its overthrow of the government was within the constitution after its complaints of fraud in the November 8th election swept by Suu Kyi's party had been ignored. The Election Commission said the vote was fair. Well, that ends our view of the main global and local political news. And I leave you with more news with Ahmed Nader.
Yes, Nusreen, thank you very much. We'll be starting straight away with the main headlines from the world of business and economy.